Okay. So I finally made it to the moment we all have been waiting for. Moon in the partner's first house. Synastry. And this is a pretty interesting one. Because, here we have somebody's feelings, the way they think on a deeper level that they may not always reveal and may not even always be aware of most of the time. Meeting the way someone projects themselves out into the world, the way they like to be seen by others. And it could be very superficial. Like, it could be not a deep place at all. This is just first glance, first occurrence, how you project yourself in the way that you want people to see you and how people see you, but they may not know you on a deeper level. Here we have your partner's moon or another person's moon meeting this place. And it could go well from the sense of it won't take the first house person long to realize that the moon can see right through them. They don't have to put on the show with the moon. As a matter of fact, it may not even benefit them to do so because the moon person is just going to naturally be in sync with the way that the first house person is. How the first house person sees themselves, like why they do some of the things that they do. The moon person is going to get it even when other people don't, and this can make the first house person feel free in a sense to be themselves. This can make the first house person not feel judged and feel like the moon person sincerely gets them and sincerely cares for them. Because indeed the moon has access to the way that the first house person thinks. So when they go to communicate or when they go to interact on a personal level, the first house person doesn't have to describe them. Explain themselves. And the moon person feels appreciated in a sense. And the moon person feels okay with telling how they feel, even explaining or talking about or discussing deeper thoughts of themselves, like the aspects of themselves, why they do the things that they do. As a matter of fact, these two both can get together and they can do things. Like, they can do things that they normally would not do with other people. They can act out fantasies. They can display their emotions, be very creative. They can do and experience all of these different types of interactions with each other. And it's interesting because they're not just doing it. They're actually developing somewhat of an emotional bond in the process of them doing this. Okay? An emotional bond. However, where this becomes interesting or takes a pretty interesting twist is when the first house person starts looking at the moon person as like the mother figure or like some type of parent figure. The first house person can start feeling like, okay, you know what? certain things that the moon person does or says and how they interact with them, like, okay, you know what, like, you're really starting to remind me of like my mother. You're really starting to remind me of the way she used to tell me or give advice on how I should be and what I should do, how I should do it, how I should look at things, what I should look like. Because what ends up happening sometimes, because listen, anytime you have like this contact that's touching someone in a personal way, in an egoic way, especially the moon, you tend to over time get some sort of comfort developed, and you tend to get with this particular interaction in particular, the ego playing out, because this is the first house. So the moon person can often get their feelings hurt by or from the first house person. The moon person can sometimes feel rejected by the first house person, or feel like the first house person is not taking the time to get to know them and understand them deeper like they're willing to do for the first house person. And then there could be some sort of resentment that ends up being associated or coming along with the moon in their interaction with the first person. And it's interesting because like the first person does have a bond with the moon, but they don't project it the same way. They don't show it the same way. Because the first house definitely can have these situations to where, yeah, they interact with the moon, they're friends with the moon, they're lovers with the moon, they're willing to hear the moon out and everything. But at the same time, what ends up happening is it seems like the first house person carries out this separate life. Excuse me. This separate life from the moon, like the whole separate thing that they have going on from the moon. The moon is like, hey, why can't we share things? The first house person is like, oh yeah, well we can, but at the same time I have these other things that I'm working through, and it can make the moon person at some point feel like they don't really truly know the first house person. And if the moon person starts giving advice, because the moon person can act as a counselor to the first house person, but if the moon person starts giving like sometimes unsolicited advice, or they start, being real open and just sharing of certain things where they see the first house or the first house person's life a little bit too much, the first house person's ego kick in. Like, okay, well, who does the moon person think that they are? Like, you're not my mom, or you think you got inside of my mind. You're not inside of my mind. Like, I don't know what you think you're doing. And you don't really know me. The first house person can really throw that at the moon person from time to time. Like, you don't really know me, because think about it. The moon is sitting on the person's ascendant, a first house, where we're dealing with the surface of the person. And so the moon person feels like they got the first house person all figured out. And the first house person is like, but you don't, because there's deeper aspects of myself. Like, you keep meeting me at this place to where it's a part of me, but it's not all of me. And the first house can become triggered. And the moon person can start to become emotionally unsatisfied, or feel like they're really distant from the moon person can feel like they're emotionally unsatisfied, or they can feel like they're really distant from the first house person more than they thought. But, it could be supportive in a couple, in a synastry chart, or within a couple, and especially if they have other synastry aspects, I think the moon, as far as relationships, do better in like the 7th house, maybe even the 11th house at times. And that still depends on what the sun sign is, because the 11th house is more like, oh, well, we're friends, but it can be good to establish a friendship with a lover, but at the same time, where you want that emotional closeness in relation, it may not be there. But like the 7th house is good, maybe even the 4th house, 5th, 6th, possibly the 8th house as well. But it's like, well, the 8th house is still digging into a subconscious area, deeply intimate and open, But I'm trying to name other houses where the moon can fall in, to where the moon can get mutual gratification from their love interest. The first house, it can be really good when it comes to acceptance of the other person, and the first house feeling accepted. But at the same time, the moon is also someone's moon in the partner's first house It's also making the first house person aware of a lot of their subconscious actions, bringing it to the forefront, and a lot of them can't really, it's hard for them to handle or to, look at it in a certain way, because it makes them feel like, I don't know if this is something I want to see. Usually when we tend to act out of our first house, and like I said, we're acting out of ego, we tend to project, whether it's good or it's not, whether it's right or it's wrong. And we want to have access to what that projection is because it's our ego. Where it's good is that the moon does often submit to the first house person's life, and they could tend to kind of like wait around for the first house person to be open or to be ready. So patience is there, but the first house person can also be very tied to the approval and the support of the moon person. And if the moon person leaves, it can be hard for the first house person. They'll notice it because they're going to want that support. Like, they're going to want the way that the first house person the moon person cheerleads for them from time to time. So when they're together, listen, and they wear their emotions on their sleeve. They can be very forthcoming with each other. They can be very emotional with each other. They can tell their secrets to each other, especially the first house person to the moon person, and vice versa. The moon person to the first house person too. Like, they can find themselves wanting to open up more, but the problem goes wrong when one of them starts to feel betrayed or unappreciated. Then it's like distance occurs, and it can be hard to seal up that distance because, remember, the first house person is more in their ego. So they could be like, okay, well, I don't know what the moon person who they think they are, but there could be an attachment there. But it can seem sometimes, and it depends, because the first house person may be looking for like more of a mother type figure or support system in the moon, and they can find that in the moon person, but it depends, because the moon person can start feeling like, okay, well, the first house person is not treating me with like prioritizing me or supporting me back, and I don't know how I feel about that. So with this particular synastry, it is important to come to the table, with an identity of self and some sort of self-acceptance and awareness, because that in a level of independence, because there's triggers here, there's support here, but at the same time, if you really try to depend on one or the other or each other a little bit too much, somebody can become disappointed. I'm Butterfly to Light, and this has been Moon in Partners First House Synastry. Peace.